Happy birthday, Elias. I thought it was time you had something official to remember this day by. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, didn't hand me a card or box. She slid a cold, white envelope across the mahogany dinner table. Inside wasn't a gift, but a formal notice to quit. An eviction. My wife, Clara, didn't even look up from her wine. My brother-in-law, Simon, just smirked, adjusting his silk tie. 30 years old and still living in my guest house? Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with artificial grace. It's bad for the family image. We need the space for someone more productive. You have 30 days to clear out your hobby equipment and leave. I looked at the legal seal on the paper. 30 days? 30 days, Beatrice confirmed. Consider it a lesson in adulthood. Now let's enjoy the cake, shall we? Hi, my name is Elias Hammer. To Beatrice and Simon, I was the lucky guy who married into their old money prestige. They saw me as a quiet, freelance IT consultant, a guy who spent too much time in the basement of their sprawling estate, fiddling with servers and little codes. In their eyes, I was a charity case, a ghost living in the shadow of the great Sterling family name. But there was a reason I was so quiet. 5 years ago, when the Sterling family's textile empire began to crumble under Simon's reckless gambling and Beatrice's astronomical spending, the estate was weeks away from a public foreclosure. The Sterling Manor, a $20 million piece of history, was about to be seized by the bank. Beatrice was too proud to admit they were broke, so she did something desperate. She reached out to a private equity firm called Aegis Holdings to take over the mortgage in a silent bailout. What she didn't know, and what I had kept hidden for 5 years, was that I am the sole owner of Aegis Holdings. I didn't marry Clara for money. I already had more than they could dream of from a software patent I sold at 24. I stayed in that guest house and paid their mortgage every single month because I loved Clara, and I wanted to protect her from the shame of her mother's failure. I was the invisible floor beneath their feet, keeping them from falling into the dirt. And now, for my birthday, the woman I had been secretly subsidizing for half a decade was throwing me out like trash. I didn't argue at the dinner table. I took the eviction notice, thanked Beatrice for the clarity, and walked back to my guest house. But as I sat in my darkened office, the anger began to boil. It wasn't just about the eviction. I opened my secure terminal and pulled up the internal ledgers of Aegis Holdings. I wanted to see exactly how Beatrice had been handling the silent funds I'd been providing. What I found made my blood run cold. Beatrice hadn't just been using the money to pay the estate's overhead. She and Simon had been funneling a portion of the Aegis payments into a side account, a hush fund. I spent the next 4 hours bypassing their private encryption. By 3 a.m., I had the truth. Simon had been involved in a hit-and-run 2 years ago. Beatrice had used my money to pay off the witnesses and scrub the police report. They weren't just vultures, they were criminals. And Clara? I looked through their private messages. Elias is just a safety net, Mom, Clara had texted Beatrice a week ago. Once the Sterling inheritance is unlocked, we won't need his boring IT money anymore. He's served his purpose. The woman I thought I was protecting was just waiting for me to become obsolete. They thought they were the predators and I was the prey. They had no idea that the safety net they were talking about was actually the person who owned the very air they breathed. The next morning, I didn't pack a single box. Instead, I called my lead counsel at Aegis. Initiate the insolvency clause on the Sterling Manor mortgage, I told him, and call for an immediate audit of the primary occupants. I want a representative at the manor by Friday. I spent the rest of the week acting like the defeated husband. I let Simon mock me about looking for apartment listings. I let Beatrice complain about the clutter I was leaving behind. I even let Clara pretend to be sad about the difficult situation. On Thursday night, Beatrice received a frantic call from her bank. The equity holder is calling in the debt, Beatrice whispered to Simon over drinks, unaware I was listening through the baby monitor I'd forgotten to remove from the main house. Simon, if we don't settle this, they'll put the house on the auction block by Monday. "Don't worry, Mom," Simon replied, his voice arrogant as ever. "We'll just charm them. Invite the Aegis rep to lunch tomorrow. We'll show them the sterling hospitality. They're just businessmen. Everyone has a price." I smiled in the dark. Everyone has a price, and his was about to become very, very expensive. Friday at noon, the Sterling dining room was set for a royal feast. Beatrice was wearing her finest pearls, and Simon had his billion-dollar smile ready. Clara sat at the end of the table, looking like a tragic princess. The front door opened. "Where is the representative?" Beatrice asked, standing up with a practiced smile. "We were expecting Mr. Henderson from Aegis." I walked into the dining room. I wasn't wearing my usual hoodie and jeans. I was in a bespoke charcoal suit, carrying a black leather folio. "Mr. Henderson is busy," I said, pulling out a chair at the head of the table, the chair that usually belonged to the master of the house. "Elias, what is this joke?" Simon laughed, though it sounded forced. "Get back to the guest house and keep packing. You're embarrassing us." "Sit down, Simon," I said, my voice like ice. I opened the folio and slid 3 documents onto the table. "The first document," I began, "is the original 2021 mortgage bailout agreement between Beatrice Sterling and Aegis Holdings. Note the signature on the lender line. It's mine." Beatrice's hand trembled as she grabbed the paper. Her face went from pale to ghostly white. This is a forgery. You're an IT guy. You don't have this kind of money." "The second document," I continued, ignoring her, "is a detailed report of the $42,000 a month I've been paying to keep this roof over your heads while you treated me like a servant. And the third, well, the third is the one Simon will find most interesting." I slid a USB drive towards Simon. It contains the original dashcam footage from the 2023 hit and run, along with the bank transfers Beatrice made using Aegis funds to buy the silence of the witnesses. That's called misuse of corporate funds and obstruction of justice. The room went deathly silent. Clara looked at me, her eyes filling with tears, real ones this time, the kind born of pure terror. "Elias, honey, we can talk about this. I didn't mean those texts." "I'm sure you didn't," I said, standing up. "But as the sole owner of Aegis Holdings, I've decided that the Sterling family is no longer a good-standing risk. The foreclosure is effective as of 5 minutes ago. You don't have 30 days, Beatrice. You have until sunset." Beatrice collapsed into her chair, her pearls hitting the table with a hollow clatter. "You can't do this. This house has been in our family for 4 generations. "It was in your family," I corrected, "until you sold it to a stranger to pay for your vanity. It just so happens that stranger was the man you decided to humiliate on his birthday." Simon tried to lunge at me, but 2 security guards I'd hired stepped into the room. They weren't the family's guards anymore. They were mine. "Pack your things, Simon," I said, "and make it quick. I'd hate for the police to arrive for that hit-and-run statement before you've even found a place to sleep." By 6 p.m., the grand Sterling Manor was empty. I stood on the front lawn, watching Beatrice and Simon load their designer suitcases into a mid-range rental car. Clara stood by the gate, looking at me, waiting for me to say something, to offer her a way back. I simply handed her the eviction notice she had helped her mother write. "You were right, Clara. I was a safety net, but the thing about nets is once you cut them, you have to learn how to land on your own feet." I watched their taillights fade into the distance. For 5 years, I had carried the weight of their world on my shoulders, thinking it was love. Now, for the first time, my back felt light. I didn't keep the manor. It was filled with too many ghosts and the smell of Beatrice's bitter perfume. I sold it to a local historical society the following week and donated the proceeds to a fund for victims of hit-and-run accidents. People ask me why I waited so long, why I let them treat me that way for years. The truth is, I wanted to believe they were better than they were. I wanted to believe that family meant something more than a transaction, but some people only realize the value of the floor once they've already fallen through it. My name is Elias Hammer. I don't live in a guest house anymore, and I don't hide behind servers. I learned that you can't buy respect, but you can certainly stop financing the people who refuse to give it to you. The sterling name is gone, but for the first time in my life, I finally have a home.